Inshallah, we will be continuing, inshallah, with our tafsir. So we went into وَمَن يَتَوَلَّ اللَّهَ وَرَسُولَهُ وَالَّذِينَ آمَنُوا فَإِنَّ حِزْبَ اللَّهِ هُمُ الْغَالِبُونَ. And we said وَمَن يَتَوَلَّ اللَّهَ وَرَسُولَهُ, in where al-Qurtubi said, well, whoever basically depends on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and certainly that's all that matters, in where they would consider that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that they depend on, is the one that basically supports them, is the one that is their center for direction, and therefore in terms of depending on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, وَرَسُولَهُ, in where they would abide by the Prophet ﷺ's sunnah. In other words, we're talking about al-hidayah, we're talking about the laws, we're talking about the different areas in where what actually makes the right path and guidance. So this is extremely important to keep in mind, because when we're speaking about making and finding out guidance and making sure that we're actually going the right path. Let me just, sorry about that, everyone, but I'm getting a gut feeling that something is wrong with the sound. So let me just make sure. Yes, I am right. Okay, here we go. Yes, the sound was actually going weaker, and inshallah now it won't. All right, so وَوَالَ الْمُسْلِمِينَ. So when we're speaking about, of course, فَوَضَّ أَمْرَهُ إِلَى اللَّهِ, means that they depended on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in terms of their vision, in terms of their direction, in terms of the authority, and where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they regard that He's the one in authority to basically determine how everything goes. امتثل أمر رسوله, in where, okay, how do I do التولي for the Prophet ﷺ? You would basically abide by the directions of the Prophet ﷺ, whether we're speaking about in terms of practice, whether it's an obligation or whether it's a sunnah. In other words, you take the resource of sunnah as the resource that you would turn to in order to recognize the direction and even an application. وَوَالَ الْمُسْلِمِينَ, in where he basically considered that to support the Muslim Ummah, to be active in supporting the Muslim Ummah, is part of the faith. So in other words, he doesn't consider himself, and this is extremely important, because we see this a lot of times in where we would have many Muslims sometimes saying things and without them recognizing, especially in America, without us recognizing, we would have a lot of families would speak about Arab and say for things like al-Arab jarab, or al-Arab al-Arab, what do you expect from them? All these different things. And of course, for the child, especially the child that grew up in America, for example, they don't really understand that you're probably saying this in where as a result of what happened, or that I'm not here trying to say that the Arab race is in any way superior, or any race is superior, but certainly or even say Afghans or whatever race we're talking about, it's important to not let down your own race, your own identity, what is of your own history. There could be mistakes, but to let your children feel that their race is inferior is extremely dangerous, because what they will not understand is that you're probably saying something to criticize a common practice that this group of people, or perhaps our group of people, are doing. But they will see through your words that we're inferior, that we are inferior by nature. We're less intelligent, we're less organized, we can never be successful, because it's actually embedded within our own race, within our own mind, within us. So same thing if we're talking about Bengals, same thing if we're talking about Afghans, whatever race we're talking about, especially if you're living in a Western country, to use these uh, these words and use this rhetoric without you realizing, you will be creating in your child the feeling that they're actually inferior, and therefore the Western culture is superior. These people are the ones that are superior, and therefore those are the ones that could just do everything right. Whatever they do, they're right. They're smarter. They're more beautiful. They're fairer in their skin. They're basically just doing everything. They're economically powerful. They're politically they just know how to do everything. So what that creates in your child is that, well, why should I be part of a community that is basically a failure in everything? You want to be part of the successful ones, especially if we're talking about the age group within probably 7 years old, and we're talking about perhaps until 17 years old, what they're really seeking, a sense of security. So this sense of security many times, or a sense of, let's say, recognition, at many times for children that age, they're seeking recognition, they're seeking security, they're seeking to be part of something, they're seeking to get a sense of belonging and a social, some form of a social acceptance. And then especially within that age group, you're then confusing them because they're trying to seek social acceptance. So by telling them that they are inferior, well, that's not going to help in them feeling that they're on the right page, or even on the right side of culture, on the right side of race, or on the right side of identity, in order to get that social acceptance, in order to get the acceptance. That's why for children, for example, when they're probably memorizing Quran, mashallah, you did a great job in probably putting their name up on the wall and all of that. When they're young, it's important, yes, we're going to teach them theoretically the importance of the good intention and the ikhlas and sincerity and all of that. But at that age, they don't really know what it means. At that age, they're more looking for acceptance, because for an adolescent, what they really understand and what they really know is that it's basically confirmed by the older people, confirmed by the others, that this is right, therefore it is. Because they don't have the brain maturity to know whether something is right or not. They still didn't mature. Because remember, when they're children, how do they know if this is right or not? So mom basically says, don't touch. And then they still continue that it's not necessarily their experiment, but it's basically the older ones. They're the ones, or at least the others, the people around me, are basically going to be my place of guidance to help me know whether this is right or not. It's basically, if they're praising me, therefore I would basically know that this is right. Well, that's where social media came in and ruined a lot of that, in where, of course, on social media, you can act completely stupid, do very stupid things, just like that, I don't know, Speedy or whatever his name is, extremely stupid, but you're getting followers perhaps on TikTok, and you're getting paid for your stupidity. You're getting the social acceptance. You're getting the social, praise that what you're doing is basically the right thing. And of course, you're getting this appreciation, you're getting paid, you've got the money, you're getting richer, even though what you're doing is nothing but present stupidity. But of course, this confuses the child, because if I'm getting if I'm getting acceptance, I'm getting the likes, I'm getting the subscriptions, and what I'm doing is basically just stupid stuff, then they will start seeing what is actually trivial or what is stupid is basically the right thing, because they'll get confused in where, okay, well, here's the consequence. The consequence is I got more money, I got more people to like my page. Well, that actually means I am getting more acceptance, and therefore I'm doing the right thing. This is basically the right thing, even though, when what you would see is that it has nothing to do with bringing any good to the society. But their brains did not mature to understand what it means to do good, what it means to contribute for the or to the society in any way. So regardless of whether it was religious contribution or whether it was, I don't know, a contribution to people's morality, a contribution to, I guess, people's awareness about the world and whatever it is that they don't understand. They would think that just that acceptance is basically is basically proving that this is the right thing. And when you're looking at this one, this is a very important issue with that, in where we would see a lot of Muslims speaking about their own race, and then those Muslim children, they get lost in how they want to speak about their identity, what they feel they're affiliated with, and what they feel as a sense of belonging to. And certainly as parents, it's important it's important to let them feel that, for example, if he's a black kid, for example, an African kid, say, oh, you're an African boy is a strong boy, for example, or an Afghan, you are Afghan, therefore you basically had defeated all those countries, you could never be defeated, you know nothing but success, you know nothing but victory. And even though we might actually think that that's creating in the person a sense of nationalism, a sense of tribalism, etc., but sometimes it's important to give that place. Now, of course, we're not going to somehow speak ill about other races, but we're speaking about in where letting the child himself or herself feel that they are proud of their own identity, part of their own identity, and where, speak your language, speak your own identity, whether it's from that country or this country. And it's definitely not necessarily, let me call it jahiliyyah. It would be jahiliyyah if you are going to basically let that sense of feeling in where think of others as being less, or use that, for example. Let's say it is true that your grades are showing, maybe perhaps your mother, your father, you just come from a family of doctors, for example. And we know that intelligence is basically hereditary. Yes, it's genetics. And you will see there are certain families, they're just a family of doctors. They're all basically in business. Their brains, they basically, as we say, from father to all the ancestors, they're all in business, and they just know how to do business. And you'll see it we've got many families, and where the family of this is basically into gold, and that family, they're basically into selling watches. That family is into pottery. This family is into making cheese, whatever it is. Anyhow, so when we're looking at this, if we're speaking down at people, then that's when it becomes jahiliyyah. But if we're speaking about presenting a sense of power for the child and raising them, then in that situation, it's not necessarily jahiliyyah to give them the confidence of themselves, to give them the confidence. Let's say, like we said, you're an Afghan, you can't be defeated, you know no defeat. Or let's say, for example, another child, probably Syrian, for example, you're a person in where your history, your ancestry is basically a place where it belonged, as the Prophet ﷺ actually said, Barakallahu fi shamina, Barakallahu fi shamina, where the Prophet ﷺ had actually said, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put the barakah in Bilad al-Sham. So Syrians, Lebanese, Palestinians, Jordanians, hey, you're all Bilad al-Sham. Right there, we're basically Bilad al-Sham, and the Prophet ﷺ had actually said, this is basically where barakah resides, and or whatever, you want to basically support that confidence. So I'm speaking about in where wawal al-Muslimin, in where this is an issue of aqidah. Okay, I'm basically saying it's an issue of aqidah, that the child or the adult, that they are feeling that they belong to a superior group in their identity as being Muslim. In other words, proud to be Muslim. Okay, proud to be Muslim. But here's one thing. It's important to see, I'm just going to lay out one thing. Right now, the political situations that we're in as Muslims, before, the Muslims were speaking of a Muslim unity. And this Muslim unity became too big at one point of a dream, of course, after the end and the collapse of Khilafah in 1924. When the Khilafah collapsed, it became, well, wait a minute, we are all divided. There's no way that we're going to unite all this division with all these different languages and all these different complex political situations. Every single area has its own complex political situations, in where, if we're talking about Afghanistan, we're actually talking about, of course, economical, political, race and nationalities and all these divisions right at the heart. If we're talking about perhaps Iraq, we're talking about similar divisions, and where, yes, different races, different languages, different religions, so many different things right there. We're talking about as well Shia and Muslim, Shia and Sunni. If we're talking about perhaps same thing, if we're talking about Kuwait, even if it's a smaller country like Kuwait, we're talking about similar divisions, let alone bigger countries, and we're even more complex. Bigger countries in where, hey, we're talking about, for example, Indonesia, Malaysia. We're seeing different classes, different groups, and even though you would really see the Malaysians and Indonesians really, as I would say, within the same area, of course, but they would still be divided, and they would still consider themselves that, no, I belong this, and one would feel somehow degraded, and would feel that it's not appropriate to consider me somehow belonging to Indonesians, because in our mind, we basically created that these classes, and not that this is part of the Muslim Ummah. Same thing if you're talking about even on a smaller level, in where if we're talking about maybe in Lebanon, a person from Tarablos, they'll consider themselves, well, from Tarablos, but the person from Beirut consider themselves upper class, and the people in Tarablos as being lower class. And then we created these classes without us realizing. And of course, at one point, there was, let's call it, the rhetoric that we're supposed to be uniting again, we can do this, but then I guess this started diminishing because it became too big of a dream to accomplish, with all these complexities, to the point that in our minds it became like impossible. So this was basically a subject that no one is talking about anymore. To unite an ummah. Oh, how can you unite an ummah right now with all these complexities? Then you went into stage 2 in speaking about a larger area. So you started talking about, for example, the unity of the Arab. As, okay, now we're starting to talk about, well, let's not talk about a very big a very big portion of the ummah. Let's now talk about at least a smaller one. Maybe speak about, for example, the Arab, or maybe speak about the Asian, or maybe speak about the sub-Indian, or maybe speak about those unities. But later on, even that became impossible, went through stage 2. Even that became impossible. And of course, the colonizing powers, UK in particular, the French, and later on, of course, America basically took over all of that, in where, of course, all of this, it became something where we went from, let's say, a dream of uniting the ummah to now maybe uniting a group of people, to then, oh, well, let's make it smaller. Then we started speaking of uniting the ummah at a national level, uniting the ummah perhaps in Afghanistan, uniting the ummah, and we started seeing Islamic organizations speaking of Islamic organizations right now giving up on speaking about uniting the ummah to right now uniting at least our country. At least our country. So it's talking about, well, uniting ourselves in Algeria or Afghanistan or Iraq or whatever country. It became even smaller and smaller. Well, now we even went in a smaller scale. You know what that means? So now we're actually speaking about not uniting the Muslims within a country. No, now that became another impossible. So right now we're talking about an organization. We're trying to get it together. So now it seems like we're even going smaller. Now we're speaking about uniting and bringing Tawheed to the individual. So we went from a big ummah to now speaking about the individual, at least the family. Let's at least bring in our Tawheed within the family, that we're uniting on our identity. That's the situation that we're actually in right now. But that doesn't mean that we would give up and say, okay, that proves impossible, because we had tried all of that and it was impossible. Therefore, it's a mission that we can never get to, and therefore don't even talk about it. So when we're speaking, the reason why I brought all of this, and we're just to understand that الولاية and تولية المسلمين is supposed to be that wherever you are, you as a Muslim, you feel that you belong to the Muslims in Indonesia, or the Muslims in Malaysia, or the Muslims in China, or the Muslims in Afghanistan, or to the Muslims in Iraq, or whatever country, that you have to feel that sense of belonging to give victory to the Muslims, injustice to the Muslims wherever they may be. This is important. This is what it means to actually have wala al-Muslimin, to have that sense of belonging to the Muslim ummah, in where you go beyond any border and you consider that that Muslim, regardless of where they come from, they're actually part of the ummah, where I have to do whatever I can to give them justice, to give them support, to give them the help that is needed in order to help them economically, politically, socially, and therefore it is not at all part of muwalat al-Muslimin, in where the person might actually think of themselves as somehow superior. I'm superior because I'm Arab, and therefore I'm a better race than someone else. That's basically tribalism, and that would be jahiliyyah. To think of yourself as somehow better because of your race or because of your blood, that somehow you're better, then in that situation, you had basically inferred that other people are inferior. By inferring that they are inferior without you realizing, you'll be giving yourself the justification to somehow not be just with the other people. And of course, we know how colonization started out with this whole idea in where the Darwin's evolution theory, thinking that if we're looking at this map and where man started out as an ape and then they started somehow evolving, and through the evolution, they eventually became the human. And of course, the wider you are, the more you are towards the Aryan race, the more on the evolution scale, you basically are higher in your qualities. You're basically better in where, why? Because it's basically the salvation in where it's the survival of the fittest. Then therefore you are fitter, you are stronger, you are smarter, you are prettier, you're more capable, and therefore you have the right to somehow be the one to instruct on the inferior races, because the inferior races don't have your potentials, and you as a more advanced race, you would have the justification to intervene and basically take over their resources and somehow control them, because they're incapable of survival. They're not capable of actually creating their own independent countries. They're not capable of becoming even human. So they would be subhuman, and therefore, since they are subhuman, then therefore they don't have the same rights that we basically have. So when we're speaking about human rights, you could see secularism is right now exposed. Secularism and Western supremacy is right now, I guess, exposed, especially after Gaza, where it was exposed, and where, hey, all that does not apply to the other non-white human race, and because they're even subhuman. So it's not basically an equal, whether we're speaking about the sanctity of human life or even their property, because they're not at the same level in their humanity. And therefore, there's the justification to basically, hey, go into their land, steal their oil or steal their resources or even their minerals, and basically take it for your own use, because they're so they're lacking humanity, and therefore their life doesn't matter. Their resources are not for them. We basically take those resources and we determine what these resources are used for. So that's why when we're speaking about al-Muslimin, it's important to also educate the Muslims about their history in order to create this this sense of al-Muslimin and what it means. Learning history is extremely important to create this identity. This identity can never whatsoever be talked about unless the person is aware of who they are, what they are, and certainly, yes, Islam is important. It is the core, but part of it is where the person, what they see about themselves, what they are in terms of, let's say, the language they speak, the culture that they practice, etc., to actually make them feel that, no, this is a part of you that you cannot deny, and therefore don't feel ashamed of being African, or feel ashamed of being Arab, or feel ashamed of being Uzbek, or whatever the heritage is. At the end, inna akramakum indallahi atqakum. At the end, of course, the one that is most honorable is basically the one that has the taqwa. That's why you would see al-Bukhari, for example. His name was not actually al-Bukhari. His name was Muhammad ibn Ismail. Muhammad ibn Ismail al-Bukhari. And why was he called al-Bukhari? He was called al-Bukhari not as a way to boast about one particular race. It's basically in order to identify where that person is coming from. And later on, of course, we know whether it's Bukhara, whether it's Samarkand, or whether it's, of course, it wasn't necessarily called Uzbekistan. It wasn't called that. But of course, in where certain areas they were called, for example, Iraqi, they were called, and we know al-Hafid al-Iraqi, he was called al-Hafid al-Iraqi, or another one, al-Bayruti. This was a common name where they were coming from Beirut. Or for example, we're speaking about perhaps al-Maghribi, that was a common name. What other names? I'm just right there trying to remember some of those city names, and where they had basically were known for that name. It was really based on their city's name or their country's name, or some of them were actually named by the profession that they held, Sa'ati. Sa'ati, of course, he definitely, that's the profession that he did. He basically fixed watches, but he was known uh, for Sa'ati because he was known for the profession and based on the profession that he had carried out. And same thing when we're speaking about, for example, Dhahabi, same thing. His father was a goldsmith, so his name was basically based on the profession that he had done. So looking at that, yes, it gives a sense of belonging. It gives a sense of an identity. And well al-Muslimin at the end, in where to bring that belonging, that it's not for the individual, but it's belonging to the ummah, where it's the Muslims in Indonesia that I'm trying to support, the Muslims in Indonesia, the Muslims in Malaysia, the Muslims in China, the Muslims in whatever country that we're trying to support in order to create that sense of unity. Because dima'ul muslimin تتكافؤ دماء المسلمين, because the worth of our blood as a Muslim ummah is basically equal. The worth of our blood actually means our own life is equal, in where the preservation of our life, the preservation of our property, the preservation of our families, the preservation, of course, of our own ird and our own, of course, society is basically sacred and supposed to be our responsibility to ensure its sanctity, to ensure its protection. And that's basically what it means to wal al-Muslimin. فهو من حزب الله. So they're basically from the ones that are basically supporting or on the path of those that belong to the group of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is important to keep in mind. How do we put that into practice? Number one, يتولى القيام بطاعة الله. And where, number one, if we're talking about the tawliyat Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then the person is basically obedient to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and giving the support for the believers and the Prophet. All right, let's move on, even though that was talked about, but I thought it was important to mention these points. Let's see here. يا أيها الذين آمنوا لا تتخذوا الذين اتخذوا دينكم هزوا ولعبا من الذين أوتوا الكتاب من قبلكم والكفار أولياء واتقوا الله إن كنتم مؤمنين. And it was mentioned in right here that Ibn Abbas had narrated that a group of the Yahud and the Mushrikeen, they started laughing at the Muslims while they were making sujood, and that's when that ayah was revealed. And certainly we could see that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala min alladhina utul kitab, and where, yes, it was part of those that had taken il-kitab, basically il-Quran. Take that back. Min alladhina utul kitab, not al-Quran, but the Jewish, basically the Torah and the Injil. They were the ones utul kitab. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had basically forbid the Muslims, if you know certain groups of people are taking the religion of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or even the rituals or different parts of the faith, they're taking it into mockery, mocking hijab, mocking salah, mocking adhan, or sometimes listen to this, sometimes even mocking Muslims. Why? Because what they're mocking the Muslims for is not necessarily because they're some group of people doing something. No, they're mocking the Muslims because of the Islam that they actually adhere to. So in that situation, this would also be considered kufr. And this is extremely dangerous because we see this all the time in where we would see, without us realizing, many parents would talk to their children about how Muslims, you go to the Muslims masajid, they're all dirty, they're all this. And of course, the child, in what the message that they're receiving is that Muslims cannot take care of their own property. The Muslims are basically backwards in everything. Instead, teach them what can we do to change all of this, because you cannot assume that the non-Muslims are going to come in to fix your masjid. What can you do to fix the masjid? You don't like that there's a broken wall there? Well, good. Let's see how you can probably collect the donations or probably talk to the board and say, I'd like to see this wall fixed. Or the shoes, they're just all over the place. Maybe we could buy a shoe rack. Or let's say, for example, you'd like to see halaqas being done there. Maybe we can hire those that have al-qira'at, etc. You know, the sheikh that used to teach my son Quran, I asked about what he's doing, and right now he's actually doing Uber. He's got al-qira'at al-ashr. He's got al-qira'at al-ashr. He's a muhaffaz. Why is he driving an Uber and not in the masjid? And the masjid is basically covering the expenses for this shaykh to actually teach Quran. We're just putting the person in the wrong place. Why? Because we're not seeing their qualifications, that we need to channel it to make sure that it's going the right direction. Now, having that being said, I'd like to mention when I was teaching at the Islamic University of Minnesota, taught there for 4 years, I enjoyed it, to be honest. Noura, were you there? I think you.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. You know, there was one professor, he actually had an إجازة, well, إجازات القرآن, that's مفروغ منها, but he actually had a PhD in Hadith from Al-Azhar University and with an honors. But of course, the Islamic University at the time was paying the instructors, this is real, everybody, paying the instructors almost $250 a month. Can you believe it?
No way.
والله العظيم نورا. والله العظيم. $250 a month. You would put all the effort, $250 a month, and it did not cover the gas.
When was that? What year?
Let me see. We're looking at almost 2011, maybe to 2000. Yeah, Fatuma. Well, I was pregnant with Fatuma, so 2009, 2009, 2010, 2011, and 2012. And one of those professors, Dr. Muhammad al-Somali, he was, like I said, he had a PhD in Hadith from Al-Azhar University. And you know what he ended up working as? Because he wasn't getting paid enough. And even, of course, as an imam, he wasn't getting paid enough to cover the expenses. So he actually would work after he would finish teaching. He would actually work in wiping the cars, basically in car wash. In car wash, everyone. I mean, like we say in Arabic, الشغل مش عيب, but this is definitely عيب. That to put this person in the wrong place instead of making sure that this person's ilm is channeled in the right place. A lot of those, yes, that are specialized in Sharia, I guess they're, I guess, Ahlullah. They don't always know
Did
how to
his
make money.
situation improve?
What?
Did his situation improve today, or it's still the same?
Well, it's you know, he's a man, so I'm not going to be able to create a relationship with the guy,
Yeah,
to
that's true.
see, you understand what I mean? So that there's this barrier. I'm not going to be creating a relationship with the guy and see how he's doing. And yeah, let's talk about that. And I'm not going to chat with the guy at the end of the day. And where this is a reality. That's what's happening. In where, we're not just talking about just him in particular, but we're speaking about our ulama and what's actually happening. What's happening is that a lot of our ulama are not given the right place and therefore the right areas to work in. And I must admit, a lot of those ulama, they're just, I guess, they've been so delved in, I guess, wanting to be Ahlullah that many times, and many of them don't know how to make money. They know how to present ilm, but they don't know how to make money. Business is another world. Okay. Business is another world, and business, it's another, I guess, mentality. Some are actually really good. They would know. I mean, my professor, Hussamuddin Afena, he basically was an expert in fiqh, but he also is wealthy because he recognized that you cannot expect the university to basically cover your expenses. So he basically started running his own business, and he would hire his students to basically work in those businesses, bookshops, and those other businesses. And that was basically helping him. But not everyone is capable of doing that. So when they're not capable of doing that, it's important that we as a community would basically, I would say, delve in to teach, or at least to provide the resources that they don't know how to provide. That's extremely important. They might not know how to do it.
Oh, you mean like train them?
Well, you don't have to train them. Sometimes, you just work in
Promoting.
what you know how to do. Let's say teaching Islam. That's all you know how to do. Well, just teach Islam. I'll do the rest. I'll basically do, I don't know, the marketing, or I'll do the, the fundraising to make this possible in order to do this, or I don't know, build the society or whatever it is. So that way we'll basically work together as a community. But it's very important that we would basically channel those. We're speaking about, like, not only Dr. Muhammad al-Somali, but we see many like Muhammad al-Somali. And we lost a lot of scholars. One of them, Amr Abdul Latif, he was known to be a scholar of hadith, and he recently died, believe it or not, recently, 12 years ago almost, a scholar from Egypt. But he, believe it or not, actually died, and part of the reasons were malnutrition. It's not he's making the wrong choices to what foods to eat. We couldn't even afford to buy food. Can you believe that? Couldn't even afford to buy food. What is going on here? You see what I'm saying? What is going on? What is going on? And it's not just this or that scholar, but it's many other scholars, and where, hey, what's happening? How can we support them? How can we support them? How can we make sure that they're channeled and their potentials are channeled in the right places? All right. So this is just, I guess, that moment in where what's really happening. فنهاهم الله أن يتخذوا اليهود والمشركين أولياء. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically had forbid us from taking the Jews and the Christians as basically our let's call it our place of one support or place of considering them somehow superior. Because the second you're going to consider that the Yahud and Nasara are awliya, you're basically losing your sense of feeling superior. And at the end, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was always teaching you how to say Allahu Akbar, because you recognize that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the most high, and therefore, and therefore, therefore, not a Western, not an Eastern, and certainly not a race and not any group of people are our center. And therefore, we would basically consider that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the place to basically make us superior. Allahu Akbar. All right, let's continue with this ayah. Right there. And of course, إِذَا نَدَيْتُمْ إِلَى الصَّلَاةِ, if you call onto the prayer, اتَّخَذُوهَا هُزُوًا. What is calling onto the prayer? Calling onto the prayer meaning calling on to الصلاة, basically الأذان, for الأذان. So let's see. كان إذا أذن المؤذن وقام المسلمون إلى الصلاة قالت اليهود قد قاموا لا قاموا وكانوا يضحكون إذا ركع المسلمين وسجدوا. So الكلبي, a known scholar in tafsir, he said whenever the mu'adhin is basically the person that was making the adhan, whenever the Muslims would stand and of course line up for salah, Yahud would basically say, well, they stood up, let's just hope they would never be capable of standing. And they would start laughing and mocking the Muslims whenever they would make sujood. And they started, of course, saying about adhan and mocking the adhan, and they said they had innovated something we had never heard of any nation doing. And it's quite strange because the Jews, the Jews, early mornings they would start yelling and with the loudest sounds and screaming and basically telling God, well, can't you hear what I'm telling you? And they would basically start really, attacking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala early morning with all those, with all that yelling. I could still hear it in my ears. Ya Allah, it's so annoying. All right, so let's see. They were saying the Muslims innovated something we had never heard of any other nation, and they would call that as yelling, like the sounds that donkeys would do, and they would start basically mocking the Muslims. And it was also said whenever the mu'addin would call onto the prayer, they would laugh with one another and they would somehow give body gestures and where in basically wanting to refer to the Muslims as basically stupid or perhaps lunatics or etc., in order to somehow basically consider them as inferior, somehow backwards, etc. And in order, and what was that for? Well, that was basically تنفيرا للناس عنها, was basically to keep the people away from them. And this is really important without us realizing. Remember that part when we said it many times, if you were to say, well, the Muslims are the masajid are dirty, and starting to mock the Muslim community without you realizing, this is exactly what would happen. تنفيرا للناس عنها وعن الداعي إليها. What you would, without you realizing, the message that would be sent to your child is that these people are backwards and therefore don't join them, because you would be backwards too. And you would be part of this backward community if you are to join. Therefore, of course, keep away from them and anyone, of course, that is calling onto that. And of course, let's see, in nida. Well, what is when the ayah said? What was the ayah? What was it saying? And where? ناديتم إلى الصلاة وإذا ناديتم إلى الصلاة, they called on to prayer. What does it mean that they had called to the prayer, and what does it actually mean? Let's see. الأذان, النداء, is basically الدعاء برفع الصوت. It's basically to make an invocation with a loud voice. making an invocation with a loud voice. And of course, there's nothing in the Quran that spoke about adhan except in this ayah. As for the one that was mentioned in Surah al-Jumu'ah, it was basically exclusive to that. And majority of the scholars, in fact, most scholars actually said there was no adhan before the Muslims had migrated from Mecca. So while they were staying in Mecca, there was no adhan. So what would they do? Would they not pray Salat al-Jama'ah? No, they did pray Salat al-Jama'ah, but they used to say in a loud voice, As-salatu jami'ah. Salah is basically as-salatu jami'ah. It's like we're uniting for prayer, uniting for prayer. And then when the Prophet ﷺ migrated to Medina and al-Qibla basically changed away from the direction of al-Kaaba, that's when the Prophet ﷺ had ordered that they would do al-adhan. Okay? But they were still doing as-salatu jami'ah until, of course, later on, whenever, of course, we'll talk about the story for al-adhan later on, inshallah. Whenever the Prophet ﷺ would basically attempt to stand up for salah, that's when, of course, they would say as-salatu jami'ah, and that's when the Prophet ﷺ, of course, later on, it was time, well, how can we unite the people to pray and etc. Until Abdullah ibn Zayd, Umar ibn al-Khattab, Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, of course, multiple Sahaba got the dream for the adhan. They got the dream for the adhan, presented to the Prophet ﷺ, and of course the Prophet ﷺ approved it, approved al-adhan. The Prophet ﷺ heard the adhan as well during the night of al-Isra in the heavens. Let's look at that one. Let's see. In where that the Prophet ﷺ heard the adhan during the Isra, is that authentic or not? So let's look at that narration. And here it was said, أخرجه الطبراني في الأوسط, and al-Hafidh, which is al-Hafidh ibn Hajar, who's basically from Asqalan, everybody. We got to keep that. Asqalan is just 20 kilometers almost away from Gaza. Okay, but right now Israel calls it Ashkelon. Al-Hafidh ibn Hajar, of course, he basically said in al-Fath, which is Fath al-Bari, which is the most important explanation. The book is almost in 20 volumes. It's called Fath al-Bari, Sharh Sahih al-Bukhari. Maybe we could see the book, right? Fath al-Bari, let's look at it right there. Hold on. I'm going to look at Fath al-Bari. Okay. I had the book. Fath al-Bari, Sharh Sahih al-Bukhari. Okay, here we go. Let's see. Okay, we're going to just, even if we don't have the book, but at least see the book, right? Let's see, right there. In where Fath al-Bari, look at how big it is. Okay, so in the book, okay, everybody, this is going to be a little off topic. Okay. The first time, well, so my professor, my teacher in school, he was actually Imam al-Masjid al-Aqsa. And he was telling us about Fath al-Bari. And I decided, I was walking down the street in al-Masjid al-Aqsa, towards Masjid al-Aqsa, and all of a sudden, I actually find 200 shekels on the floor. So I started asking around, no one lost that money. So I took the 200 shekels and I went to the nearest library and I basically asked them about Fath al-Bari. And I got Fath al-Bari and I also got Kitab al-Umm for Shafi'i. And that was in almost 6 volumes. Okay, so this is Fath al-Bari. And of course, I didn't know what the book was about. I knew that it was Sharh Sahih al-Bukhari. You opened it up and it was basically divided in chapters. Okay, so the chapters were Kitab al-Salah, Kitab al-Tahara, would basically go into chapters, 96 chapters. So until I found Kitab al-At'imah, and I was like, yes, finally, recipes from the time of the Prophet ﷺ. It wasn't that, everybody. No recipes. I was really hoping to actually find recipes from the time of the Prophet ﷺ, but it was actually something else. Anyhow, so this is Fath al-Bari, and of course in different chapters. And Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani did a magnificent job in going in details in, of course, giving that sharh for al-Bukhari. Let's just see just a little bit about what it looks like on the inside, right? Let's just see Fath al-Bari, right? We'll just see what it looks like on the inside in order for us to, at least if we can't get into the book, at least see some of the book. Okay, let's see right there. It opened up. Let's see, right? Let's see. So Kitab al-Iman, Kitab Bid al-Wahi. Let's see, what does that look like? Okay, so here we go. This is what the book would look like on the inside. Okay, let's see. He would basically put and lay out those hadith that are from Sahih al-Bukhari. Okay, here we go. This is it. Here we go. So he would say, باب قول النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم أنا أعلمكم بالله وأن المعرفة فعل القلب لقول الله تعالى ولكن يؤاخذكم بما كسبت قلوبكم. Okay, this is basically called the way that al-Bukhari had labeled his chapters, and then lay out all the different hadith that al-Bukhari narrated. So here we go. He would lay out the hadith that al-Bukhari narrated, and then Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani comes along and says, okay, well, I'm going to explain each and every single part of this hadith, and not only the hadith, but even the labeling of the main chapter, because it was said, fiqh al-Bukhari fi tarajimihi. Al-Bukhari, his fiqh, his knowledge, is basically in the labeling and how he had labeled his chapters. So he would, Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani would basically, so this piece of it is al-Bukhari, mentioning that. Then he would start explaining each and every single part of it and say, باب قول النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم هو مضاف بلا تردد. So he will come for each and every single piece of it and say, okay, this is how I'm going to break down and explain the word. So he will take each and every single bit and even go farther, all right, even go farther, and would go in explaining the chain of narration, the ahadith, and all of that. And even when another scholar like Shawkani, he was told, why don't you make a sharh or an explanation just like the other shuruh. And of course we have over 100 shuruh. Over shuruh, the word shuruh actually means explaining and going in detail in exegesis, let's say for al-Bukhari or even perhaps other books. It was very common to do these shuruh, in where al-Shawkani was told, why don't you make something similar to that? And he said, لا هجرة بعد الفتح. There's no way that we can migrate, and this was told, لا هجرة بعد الفتح. That's a quote that the Prophet ﷺ had actually said. That's a quote that the Prophet ﷺ had said, of course, in relationship to what? In relationship to, well, Fath means Fath Mecca. Okay, لا هجرة بعد الفتح. After the conquering of Mecca, there is no migration after that. You can't migrate. It was not obligatory anymore. And therefore, the reward for that hijrah is basically had ended. All right. So he used that quote in a different context, and he said, we can't invest, in other words, what he is, of course, he used that quote, but what he was inferring was there was no better contribution, better than the contribution of al-Fath, and what he was in meaning, and what he was, of course, what he was inferring to was Fath al-Bari. But he used the same quote. He said, لا هجرة بعد الفتح. In other words, there's no better work, there's no more contribution, no better contribution ever going to be done better than Fath al-Bari in terms of that of course, explaining Sahih al-Bukhari. But that hadith, now we're going back in where the Prophet ﷺ heard the adhan during the night of al-Isra. That hadith Al-Hafidh ibn Hajar al-Asqalani said, actually, in its chain of narration, there is Talha ibn Zayd wa huwa matruk. In fact, Talha ibn Zayd is in that chain of narration, and he is an abandoned narrator. An abandoned narrator, what does it mean, abandoned? Abandoned, it's a technical term. It doesn't mean abandoned by haram, no one actually took care of him. No, abandoned to actually mean that they had neglected his ahadith because they didn't see that it was authentic. Let's see here. أخرجه البزار, and it was mentioned الهيثمي في مجمع الزوائد. الهيثمي في مجمع الزوائد. مجمع الزوائد is it's in a black and green copy. That was the old copy. It's in almost 12 volumes, 12 volumes. And he had said in it, and of course, every time you would have a Tabarani fil Awsat, you're right away, whether Tabarani or whether al-Bazzar or whether Musnad Ahmad, you need to go for Majma' al-Zawaid for al-Haythami. He said, well, in that narration, there's this Ziyad ibn al-Mundhir, in where he said it was agreed upon between scholars that he's a weak narrator. Okay, so here we go. And he said, وَالْحَقْ أَنَّهُ لَا يَصِحُّ شَيْءٌ مِنْ هَذِهِ الْأَحَادِيثِ. And finally, basically, Al-Hafidh ibn Hajar, he basically said, and the truth of the matter, there's nothing authentic in regards to this, of course, that the Prophet ﷺ had heard the adhan during the night of Al-Isra. I want you to see, the intricate details, and although it sounds very inspirational to say that he had heard the adhan during the night of Al-Isra, but not because it sounds inspirational, we're going to somehow take that narration and call it authentic. We're not going to do that. We're not going to do that because we basically would stand in understanding our deen based on evidence. And of course, let's see the other one. Then the dream for Abdullah ibn Zayd al-Khazraji al-Ansari. What is al-Khazraji? Khazraji was because he was part of al-Khazraj. What does that mean? So there's nothing wrong with you talking about yourself, for example, Irish or American or Australian or Malaysian or whatever tribe you're from. There's nothing, absolutely nothing wrong with you speaking about or referring to yourself based on the country that you come from or the ancestry or whatever. There's nothing wrong with it. So here we go. Abdullah ibn Zayd al-Khazraji, because in Medina, we had the tribe of Al-Aus and another tribe of Al-Khazraj. And those were, of course, the known tribes, at least the non-Jewish tribes, right there. Al-Ansari, of course, because they gave victory to the Prophet ﷺ. And of course, they were the residents of Medina. And Umar ibn Khattab also saw the same dream, and it was a very famous story. Abdullah ibn Zayd comes and informs the Prophet ﷺ about the dream that he had seen. And Umar ibn al-Khattab basically said, if I would when I wake up, I'm going to tell the Prophet ﷺ about this. So the Prophet ﷺ heard what they had basically seen and ordered Bilal ibn Rabah. Bilal ibn Rabah. When Jabir ibn Abdullah attempted to also, I guess, be involved, the Prophet ﷺ tells him, Bilal anda minka sawta. Bilal has a more beautiful voice. In other words, I want you to look at this one in where sometimes to tell and inform somebody of, I guess, a certain potential that someone else has is not wrong. There's nothing wrong about it. To probably say, hey, Sister X or Sister Y, I think she would do a better job. I think she has a better skill in maybe presentation or a better, more beautiful voice, or perhaps a better skill in doing some kind of an activity or whatever it is. I think she's got a better potential. I think she knows how to do it right, or these kind of things, without necessarily of course, putting down the other person. So the Prophet ﷺ didn't put him down and say, your voice is ugly, but but he said, Bilalu anda minka sawta. And it's like, oh, you got a nice voice, but his voice is nicer. Okay, so he didn't say your voice is ugly, but he said his voice is nicer. That is Bilal ibn Rabah. And of course, subhanAllah, you could see throughout history, I guess the African race, even though just a note, Bilal was not considered 100% African. Yes, he's part Ethiopian and not necessarily 100% Ethiopian. Okay, anyhow, so Bilal, of course, we know the African race usually probably overcoming other voices. The most famous singers were usually of the African race, right? Even when we're speaking about the famous singers during our time, of course, we're speaking about some of the best and most famous singers, even singers. All right. So we're speaking about the African race. It definitely beats all. SubhanAllah, who knows what is actually in that, I guess, genetically and how that basically came in. All right. So the Prophet ﷺ ordered Bilal and he basically made the adhan that day. And Bilal later added, of course, as-salatu khayru min al-nawm for salat al-subh, for salat al-subh or salat al-fajr. And the Prophet ﷺ approved it. Let's say, this is important. So Bilal was the one that on his own, okay, he's the one that said, as-salatu khayrun min al-nawm. But the Prophet ﷺ approved it. So this, when we say aqarraha Rasulullah sallam, this right there is basically what we would consider sunnah taqririyah. Sunnah taqririyah, in where the Prophet sallam was the one that approved it, in where it became a sunnah approved by the Prophet sallam. All right, and certainly, and certainly, of course, it became later on that practice that we would do in Adhan al-Fajr. All right, let's continue right there. Scholars had differences of opinions, even though, I'm not going to go in all the details of what al-Qurtubi wanted to say in regards to Adhan, but I will speak about some of it, which I thought was probably at least giving it the right, and where I don't want to completely skip, because we want to feel, all right, we're so proud of ourselves that we got to the 8th volume. We want to feel proud of ourselves and feel that we had achieved in Tafsir al-Qurtubi, where we pretty much went over everything in that tafsir. All right, the scholars had differences of opinions on the obligation and the level of mandation for al-adhan and al-iqamah. Let's see, Imam Malik, and of course, when we say Ashab al-Imam Malik, this is not talking about, hey, they're the people that he hangs out with. No, this has nothing to do with hanging out. This has, the scholars, the students, that's what it means. This is what it's referring to, and not necessarily friends, the people that he hangs out with in Caribou Coffee or whatever. No. فإن الأذان عندهم إنما يجب في المساجد للجماعات حيث يجتمع الناس وقد نص على ذلك في موطئه. Let's see. As for Imam Malik and the Maliki, basically scholars, they basically said al-adhan is only obligatory in the masajid, and basically in order to join people for congregation. And of course, for salah, for the congregation, for salah. And that's basically something that Imam Malik had indicated in his book Al-Muwatta. We talked about the book Al-Muwatta. It was that book that Shafi'i later memorized, of course, at a young age and really quick. And it's basically that book. We showed it to you before, and where it contains a hadith and a thought. All right. So, of course, later on, the scholars had basically differences of opinions. I want you to look at that, in where he said, al-muta'akhiruna min ashabihi. I want you to look at this, in where if Malik had actually indicated within al-Muwatta his madhab that we're supposed to be doing adhan And then how is it that they later had differences of opinions? I want you to just look into that, in where, yes, sometimes a certain madhab can go through different stages of, let's call it, evolution. Okay, so you would have a stage of evolution in where perhaps Imam Malik said one thing, but later on, of course, the different contributions, the different scholars would basically, of course, contribute, discuss, maybe different influences from different madhab, because it's not an issue of what the imam, or at least the founder of the madhab, had said. It's not what the imam or the founder for the madhab had said, because the sanctity does not go to the scholar that founded the madhab. The sanctity goes to the Prophet ﷺ. It goes to the Prophet ﷺ. So the scholars within that madhab, when I guess they found more evidences, they probably had more access to different resources, etc. So then you had that, of course, influencing the madhab in, I would say, bringing in another stage of evolution in the madhab. So that's when even the Malikis later on, they had differences of opinions on whether it is sunnah mu'akkada. What is sunnah mu'akkada? Wajiba. Sunnah, أنه سنة مؤكدة and wajiba. Let's see, in where that's the first opinion. So this would be, let's write it down. This would be the first opinion. This would be the second opinion. Okay, let's see. So the first one basically said sunnatun mu'akkadatun wajibatun ala al-kifaya. Okay, what does that mean? Sunnah mu'akkada, in where it's a sunnah, but it's a practice that the Prophet ﷺ had practiced, and therefore we're supposed to be practicing it. But here, wajibatun ala al-kifaya. What does it mean, wajib ala al-kifaya? Well, here's an obligation. Remember, there are two obligations. Two types of obligations. There's wajib, in where we're talking about fard ayn, and there's also fard kifaya. What's the difference? So there is the fard ayn, where every individual is basically obligated to do that. In other words, no one is going to pray for you. You basically have to pray on your own. There's no way that we can have that. And there's the communal obligation. In communal obligation, we're basically needing a group of people to basically do that obligation, and it's enough for a group of people to do it. We don't have to have everyone do it. We don't have to have more than one imam. Okay, we've got an imam. He's going to be basically leading the prayer. We don't have to have 30 imams. No, we just need one imam for the whole congregation. Okay, and that's the same thing. We need a certain number of people to probably pray Salat al-Janazah, a certain number of people for Salat al-Eid. It's not obligatory on each and every single one. So that's communal. Okay, so in other words, if we had in an area, al-Misr, this is not talking about Egypt. This is talking about al-Misr, meaning the area, the city. Okay, so if we have within that city, within that village, we basically have somebody doing the adhan on behalf of everyone to remind them or to gather them in a congregation, that's enough. Okay, as for, of course, when we're seeing the other scholars, they basically said, well, that's basically fardun ala al-kifaya. It's basically just depending on basically the community, and it's not necessarily sunnah mu'akkada. We just want to make sure that, of course, we have enough group of people. It's a communal obligation, enough group of people or enough individuals doing the adhan, and that should suffice. And of course, you could say, here's one thing, and where, okay, how do we apply? What's the difference between this one and this one? I want you to keep in mind, sometimes the wording of things is what they would, I would say, dispute about, but in application, it really is the same. You know what I mean? So in application, you're both saying wajib ala al-kifaya, but this one added sunnah mu'akkada. it's a highly recommended sunnah. But in application, you said wajibun ala al-kifaya, in where it's a communal obligation, and therefore, well, we know that you both are saying the same thing. And this is really common that sometimes scholars, and you know what? It's not just scholars. Sometimes as human beings, you can have a brother and a sister sometimes debating about something when they're actually in practice, it's going to be the same idea. But sometimes you can have some people's brains are so fixated on how we put that into words, and they want to basically choose certain words, and then they'll be so fixated and opinionated that no, this is the right way to say it, because in the other way you're saying things differently. And it's really important to understand that the way we relate with the society around us, the way that we would put our wordings and the way we word something can sometimes really be a combination of different things. Sometimes it's also society. Sometimes it's our own, I guess, personality. You look at even prophets. The way Prophet Nuh alayhi salam reacted to the rejection from al-kuffar, رَبِّ لَا تَذَرْ عَلَى الْأَرْضِ مِنَ الْكَافِرِينَ دَيَّارًا إِنَّكَ إِن تَذَرْهُمْ يُضِلُّوا عِبَادَكَ وَلَا يَلِدُوا إِلَّا فَاجِرًا كَفَّارًا. Boom. Right there. Ya Allah, don't let a single kafir live on the face of this planet. That's it. إنهم what was it? رَبِّ لَا تَذَرْ من الكافرين ديارا إنهم forgot the ayah now. رَبِّ لَا تَذَرْ I forgot the A right now. I just said it and I just forgot it. All right. Now, the verses, when you look at, for example, the Prophet ﷺ, when Jibreel alayhi salam tells him, I can let these al-akhshabayn, أطبق عليهم الأخشبين, I can basically let these two mountains collapse on them. What did he say? No. لعل الله يخرج من أصلابهم. Who? Well, who would basically be on hidayah, who would basically yuwahhid Allah, who would basically consider Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as one. In other words, at the end, he was not hopeful in them. He was hopeful that maybe the children will be different. Maybe the children, who knows? Yallah, maybe the children will be different. La'alla, perhaps they'll be different. Okay. And versus when you look at Prophet Musa alayhi salam, his reaction was completely different. He was definitely a combination of, I guess, quite tough, and definitely fear was always there in the story. And three, when we're speaking about Prophet Musa alayhi salam, in where definitely, I guess the situation was getting him angry, and where through the tablets, getting angry, and of course at them and so forth. And subhanAllah, you could see in where the situation, the circumstances, whether the way the person grew up in, Prophet Musa alayhi salam, we know the story of his childhood and the different stages and the impact it had on him in how it affected his, affected his personality. But at the end of the day, in where you could see, in where scholars the same thing, if that's the case with prophets and messengers, well, that's the same thing in terms of the scholars, in where sometimes you'll find a scholar that's really specific on certain wordings. They're, that's the wording and that's the way it should be. There's no better wording, but in application, it could actually be sometimes a futile discussion, in where in application, we're really going to the same thing. In practice, it really means the same thing. Okay, let's continue right there. In where al-Tabari had mentioned an Malik. Now, this one's rather ironic. So why would al-Tabari actually mention an Malik? Because al-Tabari was known for his tafsir, in where he was doing one kind of tafsir. So if you were to go to Tafsir al-Tabari, which is probably the earliest and perhaps one of the, let's call it the most accurate tafsir, because his tafsir would not actually have any wording like this. His tafsir would basically get the ayah, would mention the ayah and then all the different ahadith. Let's actually look at that, right? And then all the different ahadith. It was called a tafsir bil-ma'thur. Okay, let's look at tafsir al-Tabari and just get you an idea of what that actually looks like. Okay, it's called Jami' al-Bayan an Ta'wil al-Quran, but give me the PDF for it. Okay, let's see right there. Look at that, and you can even get it for free, right? Oh, isn't that just beautiful and so interesting? Okay, and guess what? You can even look at that. So this is Tafsir al-Tabari, and you could see there's tahqiq for it. Oh, guess what? Abdullah ibn Abd al-Muhsin al-Turki. So basically the group, yeah, even though they don't mention it, but it's a group. Okay, they did the tahqiq for al-Qurtubi, the book that we were just studying. And let's see right there in where, let's see what that looks like on the inside. Okay, here we go. Let's see. Okay, here we go. So let's see. This is Tafsir al-Qurtubi, sorry, al-Tabari, in where he would take the ayah, al-qawl fi ta'wil قوله جل ثناؤه الذين يكتبون الكتاب بأيديهم ثم يقولون هذا من عند الله. And then he would basically just really a short commentary, but then he would go on and start mentioning the different narrations in regards to that ayah. Let's see, here we go. He'll basically go and start mentioning the different narrations. Okay, ذكر عن بعض القراءة أنه قرأ, etc. And he will basically start mentioning the different narrations and go on with the different narrations and of course explain some of the things relating to that ayah, and he would going into certain details. But here's one thing. See, he'll continue, حدثنا, and then he'll bring you a hadith. حدثنا, he'll bring you a hadith. Just hadith after, here we go, look at this. All of this, every single tafsir, every single point of tafsir, he will go and mention all the different chain of narrations in regards to just one word. So you see all of this chain of narration, this is just to say, لا يعلمون الكتاب إلا أماني. What is it referring to? He said, إلا أحاديث. Referring to hadith. So just this point of information, just this word, he was mentioning a whole chain of narration and where he got this idea from. So even if it's just one word, yes, let alone what today and where everybody is basically making their own interpretation. So look at this, in where just one word, oh dear, just one word, he'll basically, look at this. Unasun min Yahud. Here we go. Where did he get that this is minhum ummiyun, that this is a group of Yahud? He basically would mention the chain of narration. It was like, no, I'm not going to make up my own words, my own referrals. No. So here we go. And Malik was considered not only a scholar for the Malikis, but he was also considered a scholar of hadith as well. So Imam Malik was a scholar of fiqh and a scholar of hadith. Just keep that in mind. What did he say? He said that Malik had said, if أهل مصر إن ترك أهل مصر الأذان عامدين أعادوا الصلاة. This is not talking about Egypt. Remember this. If the people of a particular city left adhan purposely, then they would have to redo salah. That's what he had said. Let's say Abu Umar, which is Ibn Abd al-Barr, he said, there is no differences of opinions that al-adhan itself is basically one of the communal obligations on any city, because al-adhan itself is the main indication that distinguishes between Dar al-Islam and Dar al-Kufr. Between, I guess, the Dar al-Islam was at the time a technical term to basically describe that this basically belongs to the Islamic, at least, sovereignty, governance, community, and Dar al-Kufr. And the Prophet ﷺ, whenever he would want to send a Sariya, what is a Sariya? Sariya is basically an army. He would tell them, if you would hear the adhan, then stop. وَكُفُّوا. And if you did not hear the adhan, then basically, then this basically is going to be your duty in order to basically do what is necessary in order to, of course, this is right there, and we're preemptive war, or at least expanding, doing that jihad, and where you've got a responsibility to basically here, they're not Muslim, then you're going to do your job in whether we're speaking about jihad or whether we're speaking about da'wah, or of course, different ways in where what you're supposed to be dealing with. In other words, you're considering this as a non-Muslim place, then you would have a responsibility to do your da'wah and do what is necessary to help these people. So in other words, what was the definitive sign? It was really the adhan. The adhan was basically telling us whether this place is Muslim or not Muslim. If it's not Muslim, that means they're not doing adhan. If they're Muslim, that means you would see them doing the adhan. All right, let's see. Ata, Mujahid, al-Awza'i. Where's al-Awza'i from? Al-Awza'i is from Lebanon. Okay, Ata ibn Abi Rabah. And we talked about Mujahid before. And Dawood. Well, Dawood here is Dawood al-Zahiri. Okay, and he said, al-adhanu fard. Al-adhan is obligatory. And they didn't say that it was fardun ala al-kifaya. They didn't say it was communal obligation. In other words, they regarded that if you're with a group of people, for example, that no, it's obligatory that you would make the adhan. You're wanting to make salah? Well, good, get up. You're going to do the adhan, and you're going to basically right there regard that it's not if one does it, oh yeah, we had the adhan, a mile from here, they were doing the adhan, we're okay, we don't need to do it. So according to these scholars, that no, if you're doing salah and you're joining together, then you would have to do adhan. Okay, let's see. Al-Tabari said al-adhan is basically sunnah and is not necessarily obligatory. So how many opinions did we have? We had number one, in where it was wajib, where sunnah mu'akkada, wajiba ala al-Masr. The second opinion basically said fard kifaya. The third, let's say it in English. The first one was saying it's a highly recommended sunnah. The second one basically said it was a communal obligation. The third one said, here it is, that said it was basically obligatory. The fourth one is basically saying it's a sunnah. So just recommended and not necessarily obligatory. And therefore, okay, let's continue. Even if it's one, so according to some scholars, even if you're praying on your own, if you're a man, you have to make the adhan. Let's see. In where al-Kufiyun, and when we say al-Kufiyun, you just keep in mind, where's al-Kufa? Al-Kufa is in Iraq. And it actually was known, think of it as a whole university right there in the whole city. He said, and they hated that even if a person is traveling, that they would pray, even if they were traveling. They hated that they would pray without an adhan or an iqamah. Even if he's not a resident in a particular place, yes. So they said it is favored or preferred that the person, even if they're traveling, that they would do the adhan and do the iqamah. And فإن استجزأ بأذان الناس وإقامتهم, even though it would be considered as, yeah, well, they did it and it's jaiz, it's like it's dismissed. But of course, that he said ajza'ahu, it's like, okay, the people there, they just did it, and you can consider that as, well, that it was completed. All right, so we're just here, let's say الثوري تجزئه الإقامة عن الأذان في السفر. Said الإقامة is enough and should suffice, and therefore if they were to do al-iqamah, that's enough to cover up for al-adhan in situations of a person traveling. And if you wanted to do the adhan and do the iqamah, then that would be permissible. Let's see, Ahmad ibn Hanbal, he said that al-musafir, even if a person is traveling, they would still do the adhan. We're just going to stop at this point, inshallah, that they would still do the adhan even if they were traveling. What is that? Well, that's basically because of hadith Malik ibn al-Huwayrith. I want you to look at this hadith. This hadith is actually very important. Let's see if does he actually mention all the hadith? We're going to get that hadith because this is a very, very important hadith. Let's say right there in where maybe we could do mutaqaribun. You know, I'm just here wanted to get you the hadith. All right, here we go. There we go. This is the hadith. Okay, so what is this hadith actually saying? So Malik ibn al-Huwayrith, he said, we came to the Prophet ﷺ when we were men, pretty much at the same age group. So they were in their 20s, in their 20s, in their 30s, you know, just young men together. And he said, we stayed with the Prophet ﷺ for 20 days and 20 nights. In other words, it's basically, when they say night and day, they mean by that as 24 hours. Okay, so they're counting days, basically, what we would say today, days. كان رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم رحيما رفيقا. He said the Prophet ﷺ was merciful, affectionate. And then when the Prophet ﷺ thought or he sensed that they had, I guess, missed their families, missed their wives or their children, then he started asking them about who they had left behind. I want you to look at this one. The Prophet ﷺ didn't just say, hey, I want you to do some training here. We're trying to get you to learn your Islam. But no, he was asking them about your family. So how many kids do you have? And what are you doing here? And of course, you know, how about your family? How old are your children? All of these questions, even though, you know, you might think of them as, well, what are you going to do? What are you going to do with this information? Sometimes it's not an issue of what are you going to do with this information? Sometimes it's a communication to let this person sense that you care. It's to help you and let the person demonstrate about themselves. It basically creates a sense of transparency. It creates a sense of where we're supporting one another. So here the Prophet ﷺ is also demonstrating that, in where he was basically asking them, who did you leave behind? How many kids? How old are they? What are they doing? And what do you do? What do you work? Etc. All of these different things, basically to create a bond. And they started answering the questions, of course, because, you know, the Prophet ﷺ was showing them that he cares. And then, قال ارجعوا إلى أهلكم. Then he said, go back to your families. But here's the key one. فأقيموا فيهم وعلموهم ومروهم. And he said, stay with them. In other words, be around. It's not that you're traveling, leaving them behind. No, be around your family. Quality time. علموهم, and teach them. Take the time and spend some time to teach them their fiqh, to teach them their deen, to teach them about life, to teach them about al-akhirah. ومروهم. And there are certain things. It's not enough to teach the person things. There are certain times where you have to give not only instructions, but directions. You need to clean the dishes. Pick up your socks. Pick up your dirty laundry. Read and do your homework, memorize your Quran, whatever. All of these different things, they're basically part of raising the children or raising your family. In other words, there has to be some form of instruction and direction. Instruction and direction. Instruction in where you're giving ilm, and direction, you're giving an order. You need to do this. You don't comply, you won't get this. This is muruhum. So this is the Prophet ﷺ basically telling us the guidelines of what actually makes a good tarbiyah. What makes in raising children. Aqimu fihim, there has to be a relationship between you and them. 2, give them some instructions. 3, give them some orders and directions. And then he said, he had said some things. Some of it I remembered, some of that I didn't remember. But he said, وَصَلُّوا كَمَا رَأَيْتُمُونِي أُصَلِّي. And pray as you had seen me pray. So what are we doing now? We're here. Part of any type of tarbiyah, there is a lot of it in where it comes in demonstration. He said, صَلُّوا كَمَا رَأَيْتُمُونِي أُصَلِّي. You saw me praying, now I want you to do the same thing. And we're replicating a certain action is actually part of tarbiyah. It starts out, you may not understand the details of it. Yes, it was talking about prayers. Sometimes you would have to teach your children to perform certain activities, even if they may not understand the object for that particular thing. I don't understand why I have to clean my room every day. Anyways, it's going to get messed up. Yes, you may not understand it right now, but you will down the road understand the implication it has on your psychology, the implication it has on your health, the implication it has in basically creating an identity for you, in where you recognize you're honoring yourself by cleaning your room. You're honoring yourself by maintaining personal hygiene. You're honoring yourself by dressing up in a good way. It's honoring yourself. It's giving a good presentation of yourself. Let's say, and same thing when we're speaking about salah, in where صَلُّوا كَمَا رَأَيْتُمُونِي أُصَلِّي, some of whatever we teach our children actually comes from demonstration. That's right there. And where, remember when he said, أَقِيمُوا فِيهِمْ, be around them. What is al-iqama? Al-iqama, أَقِيمُوا فِيهِمْ, was like, oh, basically, there's a sense where, yes, they're part of, of course, one, they're eating with them, they're with their children, they're, I guess, engaging with their children, even if it's a simple thing, around perhaps going together on a field trip or probably eating together, all of that. It's basically part of al-iqama. And فَإِذَا حَضَرَتِ الصَّلَاةِ, and when salah, it's time for salah, then فَلْيُؤَذِّنْ لَكُمْ أَحَدُكُمْ, then let one of you do the adhan. وَلْيَؤُمَّكُمْ أَكْبَرُكُمْ, and let the eldest of you basically lead the prayer. Why don't you look at this one? This hadith is actually in Sahih al-Bukhari. So let the eldest. Well, what do we get out of this hadith? In where salah, one, the Prophet ﷺ, صَلُّوا كَمَا رَأَيْتُمُونِي أُصَلِّي, salah itself is basically a main pillar in where bring the bond within the family. That's the main bond, salah. When it's time for Salat al-Jama'ah, leave what you're doing and join in Salah. Okay? فَلْيُؤَذِّنْ لَكُمْ أَحَدُكُمْ, let one of you make the adhan. Stand up, make the adhan. Want you, and of course, by making the adhan, what are you actually giving the child, or what are you giving them a sense of? A sense of leadership, a sense of responsibility, a sense of making a presentation of himself or herself. All right. And وَلْيَأُمَّكُمْ أَكْبَرُكُمْ, let the imam, the one to lead, is basically the eldest. Why? What does that have to do? What does age have to do with a position of adhan? Well, the age is supposed to also be something that we would respect. So we would respect as well. So sometimes, even if the person probably is not at a certain qualification, age resembles and basically reflects experience. So in Islam, yes, the Prophet ﷺ did regard that it is part of Islam to respect, honor age. To honor age. ليس منا من لا يوقر صغيرهم كبيرهم. It is not part of us if the young is not giving the honor to their elderly. Teach them. What does it mean to honor the elderly? Well, you see them standing, get up and give them the spot to sit on. They come in, get up and shake their hands. Get up and perhaps, if it's part of your culture, to kiss their hand. Get up and stand up when you see them coming in, for example. This is part of tawqir. This is part of that respect. It's not just in getting up. But when they start speaking, listen. Even if you disagree with them, sometimes just show respect that you're not necessarily somehow, of course, rejecting their words, or you're somehow speaking over their words. So whether we're speaking about their words, or whether we're speaking about their maqamat, their positions, or whether we're speaking about in how we would show that respect, even if it's eating. wait till the elder comes in. Respect that elder. Respect. You're respecting the elderly is basically part of the religion, part of Islam. So I'm going to stop right here, inshallah. I know we still didn't finish, but I definitely needed to actually speak about, I guess, Hadith Malik ibn al-Huwayrith before we would, inshallah, end. But we're going to talk about more, inshallah, in relationship to the ayah that we're doing, which is nadaytum ila salah. There are 12 different points, so hopefully, I'll try to summarize it, but we'll also go into it. I know that some of this is advanced, but that's because you yourself, you are smart, and you know that it's important to learn at an advanced level and not necessarily consider ourselves always wanting to learn at an elementary level in learning our Islam. So, subhanakallah wa bihamdik, nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk, nashhadu an la ilaha illa ant. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to listen to them and answer the questions.
Oh man. Okay. So I just have a question about since we were talking about fard kifaya. So as far as ilm, what is required? Is it fard al-ain or on every as far as ilm, and also da'wah? Can you just clarify like which are which?
So there are some things that are ma'lum min ad-din bil-darura. There are some things that we basically have to do, and there's also fard ayn, in where the things that are obligatory on you to do, then you have to take the ilm for it, at least to the ability, to the extent that you're capable of applying that practice. So what does that mean? We're talking about, let's say, salah. If we're talking about salah, you have to know the basics to understand in relationship, for example, to what makes your salah, whether it's learning ahkam al-tahara, learning of course, the regulations in terms of impurity, and all of that. But let's say the situation that you're in, let's say this is an ill person. Okay, let's just say this is an ill person, in where this ill person right there has a special case. And in that situation, they would have to learn in relationship to their, let's say, circumstances and this exception that they're in, that we would basically have to learn what relates to the circumstances, in where ahkam al-tahara, ahkam al-tayammum, if the person is needing tayammum. But if the person is not needing tayammum, then in that situation, it would be a communal thing, in where at least learn it whenever you would need it. How many times do we really need to use tayammum? Let's see the other thing, in where we're speaking about, perhaps, yes, tahara, we're talking about salah. Those are basically fard kifaya, but to what level? Fard ayn, but to what level are they fard ayn or fard kifaya? When is it fard kifaya? Well, when we're speaking about certain details. Like I said, tayammum, only if you really need tayammum are you going to be basically needing to learn the rulings for it. Same thing if we're talking about certain details, all right? Certain details in regards to perhaps maybe rulings that are maybe pertaining to, if it's a man, he's not going to really need to learn about menstruation and postpartum and all of that, unless he's the only one available to teach his wife. Then in that situation, he has to do the job. All right, but it's not necessarily obligatory, in where, yes, there are young boys right there, and I'm going to teach them about the rulings of menstruation. How's that relating to them? They just need to learn one thing when they grow up, that's something that, there are certain details that you have to understand that relate to you as a married man, and what that actually means, and basically teach them that side of it. But when does it end, and how does it end, and what about the sufra, what about al-qudra, all of that, we don't necessarily We don't necessarily have to teach each and every single Muslim boy how to understand these. That's fard kifaya. Okay, so if it is relating, let's make it short, if it is relating to the Muslim and to live Islam, then in that situation, it would become fard ayn. Okay, it would become fard ayn to learn how to live your Islam, to learn that you stay away from haram, to learn how you would practice your pillars of Islam, and to learn how to apply it. So do I have to learn, for example, why no, al-Hajj? I mean, al-Hajj is obligatory, but do I have to learn from now all the whose miqat is where and how the details and what nullifies al-ihram and all of that? No, at least when you go for Hajj or Umrah, at least learn those ahkam in order to be able to apply it, to perform it. So, did I answer that question, Noura?
Yeah, Jazakallah khair.
Wa iyyakum. Any other question? I guess this is it. And what I'll do, we'll stop the recording